Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an Ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 128. I am nearing the end of season 3. When I first started this podcast, I didn't know how to do seasons, so I just thought it was a whole year of episodes. So my season usually has between 48 and 50 episodes per season. I record 11 months out of the year, and I'm going to be taking July off this year. So I won't be responding to emails the month of July, but I will be back in August with season 4. And I already have about 45 guests lined up for next season. So I will still accept people for the wait list, but already 2023 is looking pretty filled up. Thank you again to everyone who has recorded a story with me and who has reached out and who has so patiently been waiting on the wait list. I will get to you. I have one more guest this season. Hopefully next week I'll put out my final episode of the season. And today we are speaking with Robin. Hi, Robin.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this today.
Well, thank you, Lily, for doing it. As I said earlier, I don't know how I would have gotten through the past few months without hearing everyone's stories and being able to know that I'm not the only one out there. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Miss Robin. So how we normally start out is we start out with our family of origin, get a little bit of background on your childhood, and we take it from there. So I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of years ago, my daughter was telling me about one of her friends who had done a DNA test and how she had found out that her dad wasn't actually her real father. And I remember thinking at the time, what kind of people does this happen to? I've never heard of such a thing. So I guess the answer is it happens to people like me and many other people. So yeah, again, I really appreciate you giving us this forum to share our stories with each other. So I will start with my family of origin. I grew up in the early 60s and 70s. I was the youngest in a family consisting of my mom, my dad, a brother, and a sister. My sister, Teresa, who we nicknamed Terry, was diagnosed at the age of 2 with a huge handful of disabilities. And the doctors had told my parents that she most likely wouldn't live past childhood. I'd heard through the years little snippets about, of course, how this affected my parents. It was obviously a very tough time for them. Terry was 4 when I came along, and so by then, growing up, it really always seemed like my parents handled it pretty well and gracefully. I obviously wasn't there for the trauma that they must have gone through, though. My dad, he was a really great guy. He worked hard to take care of all of us. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, like most of the moms in that era. My home was a very loving one. I don't sugarcoat when I say that we really were a very happy family with little to no drama. As an adult, my dad and I could talk for hours about any and everything. It never really seemed off to me that more than once he would ask me as I was an adult if I felt like I had a good childhood. And that seemed to be really important to him. I don't know if he ever asked anybody else that, but I do remember him asking me that several times. My mom, she was the more, she would wear her heart on her sleeve, and she was definitely the more sensitive of my 2 parents. She was also very outgoing. She was one of those people who never met a stranger. We couldn't go anywhere without her knowing somebody or everybody. All of my friends called my parents mom and dad, and our house was the one that the kids were always at. My friends were always welcome, and as teenagers, my mom would also share her I guess, motherliness, she would talk to my friends about their problems, and they would come to her instead of their own parents. So I was told how lucky I was to have a mom that, we could talk to about anything. My parents had both come from fairly large families. So I had plenty of aunts and uncles and cousins on both sides. Most all of us lived in the same town. So we did spend a lot of time together, at least when I was young. Then, of course, like most families, as everyone grew up and got married and had kids of their own, it was harder to all get together. So that kind of fizzled out. I'd always been interested in my family's history, and I loved to hear stories about where everyone came from. I was that kid that would always ask for stories about, my parents when they were young, and my grandparents when they were young, and where they came from, what sort of things they liked to do. So then a few years back, I signed up with Ancestry to create a family tree. I figured I'd try to do both sides. Of course, that's where we crash and burn. My mom's side was fairly simple, mostly because someone else had already done most of the research for me. So I really didn't have to do a lot of legwork there. However, my dad's side, it was not so easy. His parents had each come to the U.S. from the Czech Republic in the early 1900s. And though I did have information like the name of the ship and, the manifests and things like that, and where they ended up, after that, the trail stopped. And I just kind of assumed that maybe it was because the records were harder to access out of this country or something like that. And it's hard to find names, I think, when the spellings change when people come here, or they even Americanize their names and change them completely. So I was having a really hard time. So I thought, well, maybe if I did a DNA test, that I could find some names to connect to him. So I did the ancestry test first. And when I got my results back a few weeks later, I looked at my heritage, and it fit what I knew for the most part. My mother's family was mostly Scottish with some English and Irish, and the rest was a scattering of European mixes. So to me, I guess that all made sense. But as far as any actual names for my dad's side of the family, I was getting nowhere. I had nothing to go on. Next, I looked at my connections, and I saw a couple of second and third cousins from my mom's side. The rest of the names, including the closest connection, were all names that I didn't recognize. So my top match was listed as a close relative to first cousin named Terry. I thought I finally hit on something there. So I messaged her, and I let her know that I was, new to the whole genealogy thing and didn't really know what I was doing. So could she please help me find out exactly how we're related? We exchanged a couple of surnames with no luck. And so I kind of dropped it from there. And then the next Christmas, my kids, knowing that I was interested in genealogy, bought me a 23andMe DNA kit. And I thought, well, maybe I'll find some matches through there, since obviously none of my dad's relatives had done the ancestry one. So at the time, it was just a few months before my mom had passed away. And I was actually at her house with her watching a movie when I was notified that my results were in from my 23andMe. So I immediately logged in to see that again. I saw several people from her side, but if there were any from my dad's side, I didn't recognize the names. I do remember at the time that I made a comment to my mom that I'd now done 2 different tests and still couldn't find any of dad's side. And I remember saying to her something along the lines of, "Are you sure dad was even my dad?" And I was just joking. If I thought for a minute there was anything to it, I certainly wouldn't have joked about that. I don't remember what she said, but I'm guessing it was something along the lines of, well, of course he was. So then after I spent more time looking through my results, and by the way, during the next few days, I did receive a few different messages from matches introducing themselves and trying to find a connection. I will also add that one particular surname kept popping up in these conversations over and over. But you know how it goes when you're looking for red cars, you only see the red cars. It never once occurred to me to wonder how I could have so many first cousins that I'd never heard of. I was scouring my matches looking for names that sounded Slavic or people who had listed that they had family over there. And, on a lot of those DNA tests, your results just show the name and you don't get surnames or anything, locations. So it's kind of hard to find anything. But I did finally run across a match that seemed promising. There was a guy in Idaho named Don who was listed as a cousin, and he had Czechoslovakian as his heritage, one of his heritages. So I immediately contacted him and we kind of hit it off. I told him that I believed that he was the first match that I could find from my dad's side. And he said, yeah, him too. So we started messaging back and forth a few times. And he told me that he and his wife had a trip planned the following fall to go to Prague. And I told him that that was on my bucket list as well. And then right after that, COVID hit. So he told me that their trip had to be postponed. We promised to keep in touch. And he said that he had pretty much lost touch with his relatives and would definitely love to reconnect with any long lost cousins. So I'm like, yay, I'm finally onto something. So when I do have the time, not right now though, at least I have a jumping off point. I'll be able to track my dad's family through Don's connections. So then, in September of 21, I got a notification from Ancestry that I had a new message from the close relative named Terry that I very first had contacted a few years back. She let me know that she was back into looking into how we were related. I guess she was kind of busy at the time that I first contacted her and just kind of blew me off. I want to add too that a few years ago, Terry, my sister, coincidentally, the one who was not expected to make it past childhood, passed away at the age of 59. And then the following year, we lost my dad. And then after that, within 2 years, my mom. So it really felt like our family was disappearing really fast. My brother and I, we helped to take care of our parents during those last couple of years, which I think made he and I even closer than we were. We do each have families of our own, but it really does mess with your head when you lose most of your original family in such a short time. So, I kind of dropped the ball too, as far as looking into, any matches that I could find. For the first time in a long time, I thought, okay, Terry's contacting me, wanting to know how we're related. She wants to look back into this. So I logged back onto both sites to have a look at everything again. And now this time I see on 23andMe that I have a new match. And it's my first cousin, Sharon, on my mom's side. I know for sure she's my cousin because she's the daughter of my mom's sister. This time, though, I noticed, the Centimorgan thing. I guess I hadn't paid attention to that before. And so I looked it up to see what it even meant. And that is when I noticed that I shared more of them with this Terry, who is a total stranger to me, than I did with my very first cousin, who I know very well. I found it odd, but again, wasn't what I was looking for, so it wasn't really on my radar. Meanwhile, Terry and I started messaging questions back and forth, like, who are your parents? Where do you live? Etc. And so during that time, we discovered that not only do we live a couple hours away in the same state, but for a while, around the time before and after I was born, actually, they lived in the same town, actually only a couple miles away. So now I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, how can I possibly have cousins, first cousins nonetheless, that live that closely to us and never have heard of them? And so I'm thinking, well, maybe one of my dad's cousins came here from the Czech Republic, that they may have changed their surname and we coincidentally ended up in the same town. Kind of a stretch, but I didn't know what else it could be. Because we were always in touch with everyone we were related to. As I said, my mom was very outgoing and she had second and third cousins that she stayed in close touch with and that we saw. So, there's like no way that cousins could be strangers to us and live anywhere near us. So after the next couple of days going back and forth, asking a couple different questions, I started thinking, well, okay, another possibility, I suppose, is that one of my uncles, because my dad had 3 brothers, had a child that no one knew about. It's the only thing that made any sense. And the timeline would have kind of been correct because I got the feeling she was a little bit older than me. So anyways, after about 2 days of messaging back and forth with Terry, still trying to put the pieces together, I was just leaving for the work for the day. And as I'm getting into my car, I get a ding from my email letting me know through Ancestry that she had left me another message. So when I opened this one, it only said OMG in big letters. I just got off the phone with Ancestry. Here's my phone number. You may call me. So I called her and I remember thinking, oh, this is great. She must have found out something. So then she asked me if I'm sitting down and I can still hear her voice telling me that she wanted to be sure. So that's why she called Ancestry before. And she said, before she said anything to me. And then she says, so I'm pretty sure you might have sister. I'm stunned. I'm knocked. I don't know what to think about this because that's not at all what I was expecting. So now my next first thought is actually I'm kind of happy and excited because, as I said, in the last few years, I'd lost my sister and both my parents. And the idea that I had another family member out there was really very welcomed to me. So it was really exciting. So this, of course, was also when in my mind I was imagining that she was the child of my father that he had obviously never known about. But I was wrong, because then she explained to me that I was, in fact, the unknown child of her dad. And I just want to say at this point that what I think most of us NPEs have experienced, and what anyone else who's ever had this happen to them cannot seem to understand. And that is that in the few minutes when I'm imagining this woman being my dad's long lost, never known about daughter and my brand new sister, I'm elated. I'm so excited to suddenly have this new family. And it's great news, because in that scenario, I have a new family member, but I still know who I am. And my identity is completely and totally secure still. So now suddenly it's me who isn't who I spent my life thinking I am. It's a whole different feeling. Nothing in my world made sense the way it always had. And it still feels that way sometimes. An analogy that I like to use, that it kind of reminds me, like if someone tried to tell you that they know you've always thought that the grass is green and the sky is blue, but surprise, the sky is actually green and the grass is blue, always has been. And others have known it. You just never knew it till now. She did find out from either her mother or maybe another relative that her father had another child with another woman. So it definitely verified it. And I'm guessing that was the reason they moved to the other side of the state, which is probably a good thing, because his other kids, and he had several, and they were all pretty much stair steps. So had they stayed where they were, I would have no doubt gone to the same school at some point as some of them. She and I talked for the rest of my drive home. I honestly don't remember the conversation after that, though. It's a blur. So the minute I got home, without even really thinking about my delivery or anything, I immediately called my aunt. This would be my dad's only sister. I figured if anyone knew anything, she would. Well, she didn't, or so she said. I just blurted out that I'd spoken with someone who claims that through a DNA test, which we know doesn't lie, that I'm her half sister and that my dad wasn't actually my dad. And did she know anything about it? She seemed really very shocked and told me that she didn't believe it. She did tell me, however, that she remembered that my parents had separated for a bit at one time, which I'd never heard about. I mean, why would I, though, if I wasn't born yet? So now I'm a little hysterical, and I think I hung up on her. So I sat down and waited until I calmed myself down before I then called my other aunt, my mom's one remaining sister, who really I should have called to in the first place, because even though she was several years younger than my mother, they were like best friends. They were really close, and they'd always done everything together. So this time I was probably a little more sane acting, maybe not much. And when I told her what I discovered, she too denied knowing anything about it. She even said that she hadn't known anything about them even being separated, which is hard to imagine, because as I said, they were close. They did everything together. So either it was a very short separation, or she just didn't want to tell me the truth. She did, however, after many more of my questions, tell me, she told me, like she was almost kind of just now remembering, that she did know that my mother at one time had been seeing a guy. She also told me that she'd promised my mother that she would never tell anyone. She told me his name. She told me where he lived, where he worked, along with some details that corroborated almost to the T of everything that Terry had told me describing her dad. So I knew it was all true. But that was all she told me. She still denied knowing anything about my mom being pregnant by this guy. But I mean, it just kind of fits with the rest of the story. So over the next few days, I talked to Terry several more times. She sent me a couple pictures of her dad. I've gotten a few of them from a couple different relatives, and it seems I'm getting the same few pictures over and over. So I don't know if there aren't many of them, or they just aren't willing to share. But anyway, she sent me a couple pictures of her dad, and one that she sent me from when he was much younger hit me like a ton of bricks, because for the first time I saw my eyes on a stranger. I mean, he, by the way, had passed away some 30 years ago, and I really saw a very strong resemblance to my son. And looking back, during much of my life, people would tell me that I looked nothing else like anyone in my family, which I didn't. I was a tow-headed kid with deep-set green eyes and a mother who was auburn, and my dad was olive skin with very dark hair and brown eyes. My sister had my dad's features, and my brother had my mother's. I kind of just always assumed that we were one of those families where no one looked like anyone else. I even would have people ask me after meeting my family for the first time if I was adopted. Still, none of that ever raised a red flag to me because I had no reason at all to question where or who I came from. So now Terry and I had become friends on Facebook. And of course, I was looking through all her pictures, trying to find resemblances. She had a picture of her entire family of them at Christmas when they were very young. And I saw that none of them really looked a lot like each other. So I couldn't pick up on any dominant genetics there either. Over the next few weeks, I figured out through conversations with my new half sisters and my brother, who is now, I also realize, a half brother, which honestly has probably been the biggest blow to me. I'm still trying to absorb that. He is too. We've been trying to figure out how it all came about. And when all the major players have gone, you can only speculate from the few facts that we have. And then a couple of weeks later, I also met with Terry and my other half sister for lunch. We met halfway between where they live and where I live. And it was the most surreal feeling to meet people for the very first time who are every bit as related to me as my brother, who I've always been close with. And they're virtual strangers to me. Yet at the same time, I did feel a connection. And it was a very confusing feeling. My one half sister said to me later, "So I have this sister I never knew about. What am I supposed to do with this?" And I told her that I didn't know either, that we don't have a history, and you can't have a history. You can't go back and do that. But that we could, from here on, get to know each other. So I understood her concern and her sentiment. I know what it's like to have siblings, to grow up together under the same roof, raised by the two parents with the same values and rules, drinking the same water. I don't know how to have siblings that I've never even met, or how they could possibly fit into my life or me into theirs. I also found out that I have two other half brothers who, if they do know of my existence, don't care to connect. I choose not to reach out to anyone. I feel like that's not my place in this situation. I feel like by now the rumor mill has spit out that I'm out there, and if they want to contact me, they probably would know how. And I know from hearing other NPE stories how painful that is, but I just want to say to those people, please don't take it personally, because you can't be rejected by people who don't even know you. And much of the time, I think it doesn't even have anything to do with you. It's them or pressure from their family. And people are threatened by our existence. I mean, especially if the circumstances are where there's infidelity or something like that. And their truth's been compromised too. Like I said, I personally would always welcome a new relative because I've lost so many, regardless of the circumstances, but we're all different. So truth be known, those people are probably not the ones I'd want in my world anyway. I was also given by Terry and her sister the names of 3 of my biological father's sisters. They are still all alive, scattered all over the country. And I was told that I could do with their names what I liked. And again, it's like, I don't really feel like this is my place. I do want to talk to them, at least to get some health history mainly, because I felt like they had more of the past history than my half sisters would have. But again, I didn't really feel like it was up to me to reach out. However, I did eventually contact one, and she was very sweet and told me that she had learned about me and planned to reach out to me before I contacted her, but I beat her to it. We've had a couple nice phone conversations, and she's a lovely person. Then I was contacted by another of his sisters who was very shocked to hear that her brother had a daughter that he never knew. She was very insistent that there's no way he knew about me, because he wouldn't have a daughter out there that wouldn't be part of his life. And I was not going to burst her bubble and tell her that wasn't true. She eventually found that out through someone else, but I have been kind of close with her, and she's great. Apparently the third sister, she did know. even way back when, I think she's the oldest of all three of them. And she now knows that her sisters know of me and have even talked to me, but she has not chosen to reach out to me. So I'm just going to leave that one there. The one aunt that I do talk to quite often, and for all the aunts I've had in my life, she's exactly the kind of aunt I want in my life. I hesitated reaching out to anyone from his family because they're a family that I'm related to, but I make no mistake imagining that I'm part of that family. I'm not. There was never going to be a place in that family for me. And I've had my own tribe, and I wouldn't have traded them for anything, but that also doesn't mean that there's no room in our lives for each other now. And that's what we're trying to do. So the story that I've gathered so far is that during the time my parents had briefly separated, I think that the timeline indicates that my parents probably separated shortly after my sister's diagnosis, which I won't judge because I think my mom, knowing my mom the way I did, she probably fell apart for a while, understandably. And my dad, I'm sure, was every bit as devastated, but he was more of a, we can't fall apart now. We have to deal with this person. So I'm guessing that she probably wasn't getting the sympathy that, was required at that time. So I kind of corroborated that with a couple different people. And we're guessing that's what likely split them up for a while. So that would be when my mother met my biological father, who was married. I don't know the story there, and I don't think I ever will. I will never know how long the relationship lasted or if she was aware that he was married when they met. I'll never know if they were in love or it was just a fling. These are the things that those of us with no knowledge of our coming to be will never have answers to unless someone's willing to share. And most people that are involved aren't willing, at least in this case. So when you've grown up in a family where you've heard the story so many times of how your parents met, how one of our family jokes was how I was born on the day my parents met, which was true. It was just 11 years later, yet you never got the version where he wasn't actually my father at all. So a few weeks back, I contacted my cousin. This would be the daughter of my mom's sister, who I originally called when I found out. And I asked her if her mom had told her what I found out. And she said, yes, of course. So I told her that, I really want to know the story. And as her mom was probably the only person left on earth who was there and who would know, I'd like to talk to her some more about what she remembered about that time. But I felt like I was bothering her when I asked her originally. So I thought, okay, I maybe have one more chance to talk to her. And if I blow it, I won't get the chance again. So I wanted to walk on eggshells. So my cousin called my aunt and she said, yeah, you can come over and talk to her and that she would be there as well. She said that way, if my aunt got upset, she'd be there as kind of a buffer, and I understood and appreciated that. I mean, my aunt's in her 80s, but at the same time, I can't help but think, wait, does anyone else but me have the right to be upset here? I just feel like I'm caring about everybody else's feelings and mine don't matter. So my aunt, when I got there, she was sitting at her table doing a puzzle and just wouldn't even look up at me at all, which isn't really like her. I definitely felt like she just couldn't look at me, or maybe she just didn't trust herself to keep it together while I questioned her. I was torn between feeling bad for me putting her on the spot, and feeling like, aren't I sort of the victim here? Not really victim, but lacking a better word. So I was really glad that my cousin was there, or it would have been very awkward. So I started by explaining to her that I understood. And I appreciated that she was most likely my mom's only confidant at the time, I'm guessing, and that she probably promised to keep her secret. I get it. And she helped my mom take her secret to the grave. But now she's gone and I found out, which now makes it my reality. It was exhausting trying to get any information from her. She still denied knowing that I wasn't my dad's, adamantly. But she did tell me that she was at my mom's all the time and my mom would talk to her about this guy. And that the one day she just didn't mention him at all. So my aunt just assumed that it meant it was over. I knew my mom and aunt well enough to know that this was not true. That's not how it would have done. They definitely would have had to discuss it, I'm sure, more than that. I guess she just doesn't want to give up what she knows, or maybe she just doesn't even remember. Like I said, she's in her late 80s. My cousin was noticing that her mom wasn't giving up any information willingly. So she asked me, well, Robin, what's the one thing you really want to know? So I did tell her that my brother and I had been really torn up about wondering whether or not my dad ever knew the truth. I mean, that became the thing that we really, really needed to know more than anything. So then my aunt actually looks up at me and says directly to me, "Oh, I think he did." So, I mean, I'm guessing from that she knows much more than she's telling. Because how would she know he did unless she was aware of the whole thing, right? Um, at first, I was really angry with my mom for lying to me all my life. I mean, I was torn between wanting to dig her up and choke her to feeling sorry that she felt like she had to keep this secret for all those years. But didn't I have the right to know? I think I've gotten past that. I don't know. Some days I do, some days I don't. I don't think my mother was a narcissist. She did lie to me. There's no doubt about it. But as much as I'm surprised at how much I obviously never knew about her, I'm certain of one thing, and that is that they chose to tuck their secret away, not because they were worried about the repercussions of getting caught in a deception, but to protect me. I'm certain of that. They were probably trying to protect me from a circumstance that I would not have been welcomed into. I also know for certain that if she had known, or my dad, that there was ever even the tiniest chance that I'd learn the truth, she would want me to know the whole story. One of my best friends said to me when I was telling her about this, that she wondered if that was why my mom was one of those people who went out of her way to understand people's actions when the rest of us just sat in judgment. My mom did try to understand everyone no matter what they did. My biological father's wife is the only other one from the original story left. She's pretty old, and I guess she's pretty with it. And my one half sister did talk to her about meeting me and said that her mother would most likely be okay with answering any questions I might have. But I will say this: I have learned enough to know most of the story. I also know that for each question that I did get answers to, it would bring up several more. So I have, for now anyway, decided to leave it where it sits. You know, if you'd asked me 8 months ago, the story would sound very different than it does today. I have had minimal counseling over this. By the way, there really needs to be a new specialty in this area. And I've had a million hours of soul searching. My conclusion is that the past is not what I'd been led to believe, but that doesn't make me a different person than I ever was. It makes me better, I think. And then I've overcome a giant hurdle that I would have thought would break me. Instead, I feel stronger for the experience. I'm very grateful to my parents that they loved me enough to raise me to not have to experience trying to fit into a family that I was never meant to be a part of. Times were different back in the early 60s when I came to be. No one could have foreseen home DNA kits. Was it irresponsible to not tell me that maybe my medical history wasn't what I believed? Yeah, for sure. Maybe they weighed the pros against the cons and decided that this would be the lesser, or maybe they just honestly never considered those particular consequences. That's another thing I'm never going to know. I'll also never know why my mom couldn't have told me the truth when I jokingly asked her about my dad not really being my dad. It would have been the perfect segue. The rest of the players were gone by then. I do know that I'm happy to have met my two half sisters. I have a particularly close bond with Terry. She feels like an angel sent to me when I really needed one. Oh, and her name, what are the chances, right? And to my new aunts who are really happy to have me in their lives. The one aunt adored her big brother and is thrilled to have one more living connection to him. None of these relationships would have worked at any other time, I'm sure, but they do now. I also recently met up with Terry and my new cousin Don, the one from Idaho, along with his wife Mary in Chicago, and we had the best time. I'm so happy to have these wonderful new relatives. If it seems like I'm telling you that I've absolutely made my peace with the situation, I can honestly say this week that I have. But next week might be different. To me, it's one of those things that changes regularly. So shortly after I learned the truth, I was telling one of my friends about it. And she was somebody I grew up with. And she said that she too had done a DNA test and had discovered a cousin that she was never aware of, but that she just never pursued it. So about a week later, she texted me to tell me that my story prompted her to look into it again. And guess what? That's when she discovered that she was also an NPE. Surprise, surprise. So, but she decided that she knew her parents adored each other for many years and had a very long marriage after that. So she's just really content not to look into it any further. She's not interested in meeting any half siblings and chooses to shelve the whole thing. So, we're all different in how we process this. All I know is that for sure is that my parents did decide to stay together. They ended up happily married for a total of 65 years, minus the blip on the radar that resulted in me before my dad passed. And that my biological father and his wife, they chose to stay together as well. My sisters tell me that he was a wonderful dad to them. Sometimes I wish I'd never found out the truth, but since I have, I guess I'm glad that it didn't come out till it did. I have thought that I would have liked to meet my biological father, but then I remember that he always knew about me and chose not to know me. So I will be okay with that too.
I have a question or two.
Sure.
Okay, so you have this, congratulations, by the way, on the new connection with Terry and some of your other family members, aunts, and your other half-sister. The two half-brothers you speak about that you are not connected with, are those Terry's half-siblings?
They are.
I mean,
no, they're her full siblings, yes. So my biological father had actually 6 children before me. I would be the 7th. He and his wife had 6 children. As I say, they were all kind of stair steps. There were 3 girls, 3 boys, and one of the boys and one of the girls have each passed away. Mm-hmm. In fact, maybe not notable, or maybe it is, I don't know, but the youngest of the 3 daughters was only 4 months older than me.
And you would have been the youngest on that side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Meaning that his wife was pregnant at the same time my mom was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And it sounds like you have acceptance over, because sounds like your birth father did know of your existence.
Oh, he did. He did.
Yeah.
His wife did too. And apparently the one aunt did, the one that I haven't had contact with. She remembers at the time the whole story. So she just chooses not to reach out, and I'm not going to reach out to her first. I mean, there's no point.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes when there's people that just, you can just tell when they're not going to talk or they're not going to make that connection, and nothing you can do about that. Yeah.
And I was told by one of my half sisters too, that, one of the 2 brothers that are still with us, that, and again, I don't even know if they know of me. And I know that the girls have not told them. I know one of them actually has an NPE child of his own. So I think they feel like he doesn't really need to know. So, but I'm okay with it. Like I said, you can't be rejected by someone who doesn't know you.
Yeah. I like how you put that. I was actually trying to internalize that myself. I'm like, that's the attitude I need to have.
It is. It really is.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Robin, if people wanted to contact you, are you open to that?
I am, yes.
Okay. And how could they do that?
Well, they could email me at rlehrman707@yahoo.com.
Okay. I will put that link in the show description for this episode. And Robin, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Well, thank you for letting me. And again, thank you for sharing everyone else's stories for the rest of us to learn from.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.